Again, every 6 months or so, some busybody notices that it is in general only white people who live in the countryside and that only white people from cities and towns seem to make the effort to visit mountains and moors or even to walk around the countryside. Why should this be? I am delighted to say that those investigating the matter agree with me, on one point at least. Talking of busybodies, it will perhaps be recalled that the organisation Hope Not Hate, who are busybodies par excellence, are not members of my fan club, to say the least of it. Indeed, they've published a case file devoted to me in which I am described as an influencer of the radical right. This contains some lies, but also some things which I actually said apropos of ethnic minorities and their reluctance to visit the countryside or climb mountains. I give a link to this post, the file on me, as they call it, at Hope Not Hate, in the description to this video. We read that, and I quote, in another post, he writes that black people seem to prefer to operate in groups. What an outrageous suggestion to make. I mean, really, that's just the kind of thing which you would expect from an influencer of the radical right, isn't it? Disgraceful. And yet, in the description to this video, I give a link to a newspaper article about the latest efforts to increase diversity in rural parts of this country. We read that the Malvern Hills National Landscape said in proposals, many minority peoples have no connection to nature in the UK because their parents and their grandparents did not feel safe enough to take them or had other survival preoccupations. What that means, your guess is as good as mine. They went on to say that while most white English users value the solitude and contemplative activities which the countryside affords, the tendency for ethnic minority people is to prefer social company. That is precisely what I said in a video on this subject, and the statement was considered so unacceptable by Hope Not Hate that they felt that it deserved to be quoted as an example of my racist mindset. Funny, no? The various reports on how to diversify the countryside have identified other problems and barriers which prevent black people and Muslims from exploring national parks or walking along country lanes and visiting small villages. Dogs are a problem. You encounter a lot of them in the countryside, and they're not always on leads. Think sheepdogs, guard dogs, and so on. We are told elsewhere that research has also been commissioned to support this work, some of which suggest that dogs should be kept under tighter control, as some groups are scared of them. This is a direct and obvious lie. It is not that black people or Asians are scared of dogs. This relates specifically to Muslims because dogs are haram or unclean in Islam, like pigs. Devout Muslims have a horror of coming into contact with dogs or even having them brush against them. Other concerns mentioned are also specific to Islam. One concern was that rural facilities cater to white English culture, namely, protected landscapes were closely associated with traditional pubs, which have limited food options and cater to people who have a drinking culture. Accordingly, Muslims from Pakistani and Bangladeshi groups said this contributed to a feeling of being unwelcome. In other words, it's not the countryside as such which is found to be unwelcoming, but rather British culture. We are famously a nation of dog lovers, and pubs have been a part of our way of life for many centuries. Muslims' dislike about rural areas in particular is that they are too British. I can say with absolute assurance that even if we chained up all the dogs and demolished all the pubs, though, there would still not be an influx of black people and Muslims to our countryside. They simply don't see the point in wandering around somewhere where there is nothing but grass and trees. I lived in Tottenham for some years, An area of London which most viewers will probably imagine is a bleak inner city area with no access to nature. In fact, this is quite wrong. For 10 miles of its length, the River Lee, which enters the Thames in London's East End, is flanked by open land known simply as the Marshes. Stratford Marsh, Hackney Marshes, Walthamstow Marsh, Tottenham Marshes, they're all much of a muchness. Grassy plains, arid rather than marshy, a scattering of low shrubs and patches of woodland. A lot of wildlife there, foxes, badgers, kestrels, frogs, all kinds of things. Tottenham Marshes are only a few hundred yards from Tottenham High Road. We often went over there with the children when they were small for picnics, walks, nature study and so on. Many white families in the area would do so. In all those years I never saw a single black person on Tottenham Marshes. It is simply not somewhere that black people would ever think of visiting. The only part of the marshes where you see black people is up by Hackney Wick and Homerton, where there were football pitches on the marshes. Black people will go there for team activities, but the idea of roaming around aimlessly among grass and trees is simply not a thing for them.